In times past, the United States and Russia were regarded as two most significant forces in space. But in recent months, a giant Asian country seems to have joined the race, and it's none other than China. The renewed Chinese interest in space is inspired by the need to expand internet access across the country and also to install itself as one of the biggest players in the aerospace industry. But what exactly is China doing to achieve this extraordinary goal? And can it actively compete with the US and Russia in the space race? Let's find out. China's recent moves in space have been quite ambitious and surprising to some extent. I mean, everyone knows that China has some of the best minds in the technological world, but no one really expected them to emerge as one of the biggest players in the space race so quickly. The Chinese incursion into space is led by the China National Space Administration, which is ultimately the country's version of NASA. A few private companies have also made significant contributions to the goal. This includes Landspace, an aerospace company that provides launch mission services. Back in 2018, the company launched its first rocket, the Zhuke-1, into space from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. Powered by solid propellant motors, the Zhuke-1 spacecraft was carrying the Weilai-1 satellite, which belonged to the China Central Television. The journey started well with the Zhuke rocket sailing through the first and second stage with ease. But unfortunately, the rocket developed an issue during the third stage, which means that the rocket couldn't reach orbit. Despite the disappointment, the Zhuke-1 still went down as the first ever Chinese private-owned rocket to attempt to enter orbit. The signs were encouraging, and the company was prepared to utilize this newfound momentum as much as they could. In September 2020, the company raised $173 million in a Series C funding led by a couple of reputable investors like Sequoia Capital China, Country Garden Venture Capital, Matrix Partners China, and Cornerstone Capital. This investment was supposed to help Landspace in its development of a more advanced rocket called the Zhuke-2. The development process would take another 3 years before it was completed. Reaching a height of 49.5 meters, the Zhuke-2 is 20.5 meters shorter than SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. It is also slightly shorter than the company's proposed Starship rocket. In terms of diameter, the Zhuke-2 rocket measures 3.35 meters compared to 3.7 meters for Falcon 9 and a proposed 9 meters for the incoming Starship rocket. Powered by 4 TQ-12 Methalox engines, Zhuke-2 delivers up to 2,680 metric tons of thrust and a launch mass of around 229 tons. The Zhuke-1 rocket took to the skies and completed its first ever mission in July 2023. This comes after 2 failed attempts to reach orbit in December 2022. Remarkably, as a result of this grand mission, the Zhuke-2 smashed 2 records. It became the second private Chinese liquid propellant rocket to reach orbit and also the world's first Methalox rocket to reach orbit. The flight mission was completed according to the procedure, and the launch mission was a complete success, Landspace said in a statement. The Zhuke-2 rocket is the world's first liquid oxygen methane rocket that successfully entered orbit, and it is also the first launch vehicle in domestic civil and commercial aerospace to successfully enter orbit based on a self-developed liquid engine. This was an historic moment not only for the company but also for the entire Chinese Republic as a whole, because this was a feat that nobody had ever achieved. Not even the US or SpaceX had managed to achieve it. And all of a sudden, a Chinese company came from nowhere and was able to do it at the third time of asking. This says a lot about how far China's space industry has grown in recent times. More importantly, it proved that China can actually compete in the space race. The chemical properties of propellant and the ratio in which they're combined is regarded as one of the gray areas of space travel. And even when the combination is gotten right, scientists still have to worry about the weight of the propellant fuel in relation to the mass of the rocket. On average, propellant fuels make up around 90% of the entire weight of rockets. For instance, the Saturn V rocket that facilitated the famous moon landing used over 2 million liters of kerosene and liquid oxygen. That's about enough propellant fuel to fill a 50 meters Olympic pool. These are just some of the problems that come with using that traditional fuel like hydrogen, kerosene, and earth storables. And that's why scientists are keen to try alternatives like methane. Experts believe that the combination of methane and liquid oxygen offers around 5% more efficiency than the combination of kerosene liquid oxygen when burned at the same pressure. Interestingly, scientists believe methane engines can outperform traditional engineers by up to 20% when they run at higher and more efficient pressures. Another benefit of methane over traditional fuel is that it is much easier to refine. In addition, using methane as propulsion fuel is cheaper than conventional fuel because the quantity of methane required for liftoff is much less. This will ultimately drive down the cost of space travel. With all of these benefits, it's glaring that methane is the propulsion fuel of the future. I mean, going by his antecedents of Elon Musk, one would have imagined that SpaceX would have been one of the first companies to pioneer this technology. But so far, Landspace, a Chinese startup, is the only company that has been able to crack the code. Beyond methane-powered space flights, China, in the last few months, has also moved to establish a permanent experiment hub in space. Early this year, the Asian giant released photos of its just-completed Tiangong space station. This 23-ton state-of-the-art facility will be used by Chinese scientists to carry out useful research in space. China is also hoping to establish partnerships with some of its allies like Russia, the same way the United States collaborates with Canada and its other allies on the International Space Station. Already, Chinese sources say the country has signed over 145 space cooperation agreements with 46 national space agencies and countries across different continents. This includes Asia, Europe, and even Africa. For China, these are just baby steps in its grand plan to send astronauts to the moon by 2030, develop reusable carrier rockets by 2035, and become a leading space power by 2045. However, in the short term, this country's renewed interest and efforts in space will allow it to pluck some low-hanging fruits. For instance, over 350 million people in China don't have access to the internet, meaning that the Asian giant has the world's highest offline population. For context, the number of internet-deprived people in China is about 30 million more than the entire US population. To solve this problem, China has moved swiftly to develop its own satellite internet network, just as SpaceX did in the past with Starlink. In July 2023, China launched a prototype internet satellite aboard a Long March 2C rocket. The goal of this mission is to test and validate the country's satellite broadband technology before it is rolled out en masse. In the long run, China hopes to set up a mega constellation in the low Earth orbit that will consist of up to 13,000 internet beaming satellites. These satellites will help spread internet access even to the most remote places in China. While China's quest to explore satellite internet technology is still in its experimental phase, SpaceX has become an authority in the business through the Starlink project. Currently, the American aerospace company has over 4,400 active Starlink satellites in space. In the coming years, SpaceX plans to continue launching more Starlink satellites until it achieves its aim of creating a mega constellation of up to 42,000 satellites. But the Chinese are clearly not going to allow NASA, SpaceX, and other US companies to have a free run in the low Earth orbit. In addition to the efforts of China's space agency to launch internet satellites, a couple of Chinese companies also have plans to set up internet satellites constellations in the low Earth orbit. One of them is Galaxy Space, a Beijing-based aerospace company that plans to create a 1,000 satellite constellation. At the time of making this video, the company has already launched a few operational satellites and is well on track to achieve its goal. For companies and countries looking to make a big statement in space, cost is something that cannot be overlooked. According to experts, creating a functioning constellation of internet satellites will cost anywhere between $5 to $10 billion. Not to mention the operational cost, which is estimated to be anywhere between $1 and $2 billion. So in other words, money is a very important factor in the space race. Currently, the United States has continued to lead the rest of the world in terms of investment into space technologies. NASA's budget for 2022 was around $24 billion. That's about 50% more than the $12 billion amount the Chinese government put into space programs within the same period. To be fair, China has made some significant progress in space in recent times. But if the Asian giant is ever going to dethrone the United States as the leader of the space race, it must significantly increase its space exploration spending over the coming years. Thanks for watching this video to the end. If you've enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to Magnifying Space to watch more interesting videos like this one.